Hello, John. Thank you for coming back to the show.
Uh, Thanks for having me on the screen in the midnight sun of Pacific Northwest.
So the last we talked, I think it was 3 weeks ago.
Yes.
And before we begin our latest and greatest updates of what's going on around the world, I just want to remind the audience in the description box, you can click the link and that will take you to John's website. You can sign up for the periodicals. You can also sign up for a reading. We'll talk about that later within the show, exactly what that all entails. But please click the link, help John out. We do these videos for free for everybody, so please help support the channel. Also, please share the links and click the like button so we can grow the show. Greatly appreciate it. So, John, as I do the behind the scenes admin stuff, take it away.
Yes. Well, I had a feeling there would be a lot of change and also a lot of standing still in the two fronts that are the primary fronts of this uh, conventional phase of World War III, which has been raging since February of 2022. So I contend. Of course, there are other fronts. There's Mali and Sudan and Africa, the kicking out of French colonialists in the Sahel region. Um, so these are smaller fronts, but the two main fronts, it's just like World War II, there were certain areas would just flare up and the other areas would calm down. There'd be long pauses and they'd flare up and calm down. It was only in the last few years that everything was seemed to be going on at once. And here we are already in the fifth year of this conventional World War III. Um, and it doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon. Although I just got the last subscribers, their copy of it. I started last night and started this just now to finish sending everybody out their stuff of my newest and unfortunately a second special emergency Hogue prophecy report. I was going to have this as the opening article in about 3 or 4 article report for the end of May into June, but now I think those articles are going to do better in June, latter half of June, when we get a clearer understanding of where a good jump point in the present is to start looking at the future. That's what I often do in forecasting. I take my time to look what's happening, and I'm trying to then anchor on something in the present that is a point where I can really go off and talk about different things that can happen. I mean, for one thing, the Iranian Israeli American part of this war has been, well, basically, America lost the war with Iran in its first 39, 40 days. And now here we are, I think, past day 90, 93 or something like this. Now this is also becoming a long and drawn out war, not because of the Iranians, but because who have won. It's because Trump is completely trapped on top of that, struggling with his frontal lobe dementia, trying to work out a way how he can get out of this huge trap he's put himself in. I mean, he is damned if he does or damned if he doesn't with his handlers, with his handlers, this. I think, I think I want to change the name of America now and call it APAC America, because it seems like they're our government now, since they've crowded out Massey, who was one of the, with Rand Paul in the Senate and Massey in Congress, were the only two people that haven't been completely bought and sold to the APAC fundraisers who are basically, they bought our government for Israel. And so from all those sides, he's in a real mess, and he's all over the place. And the only good thing I could say about it is that the people around him, especially the military officers, are. It sounds from what Robert Barnes is saying through his contact, which happens to be his friend, the vice president. Um, is usually very accurate in what he's talking about, is that the there's a lot of people in the military that are pretty much telling him, no, you can't do that, Mr. Trump. No, it's not going to work. And I think a lot of this stems from the 3 hour meltdown a few months ago that he had when the two pilots were missing. And he it pushed his buttons in. Oh, it's going to be like hostages in Iran. I'm going to be like Jimmy Carter. You people are turning me into Jimmy Carter with the hostages. And he was literally freaking out so much that in the war room, as they were trying to control the situation, the officers and people, all the screens trying to see where they were, that finally Kane, General Kane, of the Air Force, head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, rose some cane. He raised some cane and literally pushed the president out of the room and locked it and said, "You've got to calm down. You know, you're not helping us sort this problem out with all your yelling and screaming." So in a way, there's a shift where rather than everybody being just blind yes men, some of the people in the cabinet are starting to kind of realize that they're managing a grandpa here, grandpa president, and sometimes they have to kind of put him in his place. And I think probably Kane has learned that even before front lobar dementia was overtaking Trump, he always had this kind of 8-year-old hero worship of anybody with stars on their shoulders and the fruit salad of medals. And so now he's getting more childish and childlike, I think they're kind of helping him with that by, sit down, have your coffee, sit down, and we'll come back to you. And but he's he it's he can't get out. He can't, and if he gets out from under the Israelis, Netanyahu will start another war and pull him back in. I mean, it's like Michael Corleone in Godfather 3 on steroids. It's like every time I try to get out of the business, they pull me back in again. And so, the mafia business, well, now it's Zionist mafia is doing this. The so-called ceasefire ceasefire in the Israeli terminology means you Lebanese people, you stop firing and we keep firing back, and just trying to do to Lebanon what happened to Gaza Strip. It's disgusting. It is really the even from the last 3 weeks, the level in which the world is turning away from Israel and seeing it as a pariah nation has just tripled in the last 3 weeks because of things that are happening. And actually, America and Israel are now being deemed by the rest of the world, the community of countries, as the number one and number two worst countries on the planet. And so even the United Nations had to announce that they had to put Israel on the list, this especially bad list where they use torture and sexual harassment, sexual abuse to as part of what happens to the people. And of course, the Ben Gavir photo op where all the people that were on the flotilla coming in were all forced into a stress position with hands behind their backs tied, and he's gloating over them. And I hear some of the women who have been freed also said they were sexually assaulted by the Israeli soldiers and guards. And yeah, it's just not a good look. And basically, um, what the country, the United States, the people of the United States turn away from. I mean, I can see a situation where AIPAC may be under pressure to be forced to identify itself as a foreign agent, because it is, and because the American people are starting getting angry about it. There's a lot brewing across the country because, it's like everything Donald Trump promised to the thinking MAGA people, there's always going to be the other 30% of MAGA who just go, He's Trump. He can do no wrong. Oh, he shot somebody on Fifth Avenue. Oh, that's okay. We love him. Oh, he got us he lost majorly in a big war. Well, that's all in the Middle East. Well, okay. Stand by our man. Now he's lost all the more intelligent MAGA people like Tucker Carlson and others who actually were the reason why he got reelected because of their agency of that and their promotion of him. So, you know, it's going to be a mess, and it's going to be it's going to be a massacre politically in the midterm election for Mr. Trump and the Republican Party. I mean, some people are saying it may be one of those situations where a landslide happens. House and Senate are probably all going big time to the Democrats. But there are some thinkers and pundits out there who think, oh, this is going to be like last time this happened, when a party really was taken out of the office. They were gone for like 10 years before they came back into power. Um, People seem to forget that didn't take 10 years didn't go by for the Democrats to come back in a surge from their big debacles earlier on after the end of Obama and Trump coming to rise and all of that. Um, the other thing is that I think we're all going to experience what people in Britain in their politics are going to experience, have already experienced for years. When the version of the Republican Party in the parliamentary government of England was the Conservatives, and they literally imploded. But then what replaced them was their version of the do nothing, who cares Democrats, the Labor Party, who were just not, they ended up making a mess of it too. So I could see, I think what's more possible in American politics is these mood swings that are only going to be a few years, not a few decades, because both sides are missing it. Now, an interesting thing is happening in England is in Britain. I keep saying England when it should be Britain, but frankly, I predicted it years ago, and I can see it coming maybe before we get even to the 2030s that Britain's going to start breaking up, and England's going to lose the Union Jack and become the Whitefield Red Cross of St. George again. It'll be England again. Maybe that's a good thing, and it can really start over again because it's holding on to this ghost of empires past, and as we are starting to become ourselves, the Americans, the ghost of the hegemon past, um, which, as I predicted, would be very rapid, and it's happening, and it can't stop now. So, um, lots of big shocks and change for the whole power base of the United States. Its whole way of being since not only since World War II, but especially since it became a unipolar hegemon after the end of Cold War One, which is what most people call the Cold War. I call it Cold War One because it started in 1948 and it ended officially, as per George Sr., President, and Gorbachev. They officially ended the Cold War in December of 1989, even though a lot of pundits seem to put it in 92. It really was 1989. That was the afterbirth of the stillbirth that came after it. So that's what's going on in Iran now. Um, the the subject of this is a rare time for me because I started this month and I'm ending this month with a single article, one article, a lot of illustrations and stuff and links, and another article dealing with a major development that I spoke on before back in May, just before. Let's see what I have my time chart here. Let's see, where was I when that was going on? Okay, May. Yeah. Yeah, I remember talking a little bit about it. And there was this to refresh everybody's mind, there was Vladimir Zelensky. There's been this drone war going on between the Russians and the Ukrainians, and it's really become much more involved. And the Iranians are starting to hit a lot more targets in the Russian oil infrastructure. However, what I'm noticing is they are hitting a lot of storage tanks. Of course, we had a lightning bolt in El Segundo in LA when I was growing up. A big rainstorm came in the winter and it launched a lightning bolt and set one of those oil reserve is in the oil tank field ablaze. And it was amazing. It was just before Christmas. It burned into the new year. And it was just this vast black cloud of smoke covered Los Angeles. And so, but really what happened is they just let it burn and all the fuel burn itself off. And then they just build in a month or so, they build another tank. And so that's what it looks very dramatic. And the Iranians are more about the narrative than actually winning this war. They're more about creating a narrative that shows them winning rather than actually winning it, which they can't. Um, and so, oh, look, we're hitting the Russians really hard now. Well, no, they're not. It's causing damage, but the thing that is really looming, and it was starting a little when I did my May 8th, 9th release because of Zelensky openly threatening to send a drone attack into Red Square to have them blowing up amongst thousands of people watching the parade and the parade itself, the Victory Day parade. And even though my contacts in Ukraine, they seem to be blind or deaf to the reality that Zelensky he did indeed make that threat. I heard it, and so, but it's a real dead zone for real news in Ukraine these days. It's what happens when you silence all the opposition and put opposition parties that might have a hint of sympathy for the Russian-speaking Ukrainian citizens, which are like a quarter of the population. And then you end up with Zelensky coming in saying, I'm going to open all the parties again. We're going to get a negotiation with Putin when he first was elected. And then as soon as he got into the presidential office, these big goons that are members of the right sector and Azov and all the other Stefan Bandera fascists that really run Ukraine, made the Jewish Russian realize that he was a citizen. He's also a Russian Ukrainian. Doesn't even speak Ukrainian very well. He says, "You're our poster boy. We're the real power." And so he does their bidding, which means all those promises he made for a servant of the People Party were all talk about somebody not fulfilling their promises. He makes Trump look like a lightweight compared to what Zelensky promised and what happened, the horrors that happened, especially if you were not Western Ukrainian. You could not speak Russian anymore, first in government offices, and then later Russian could not be spoken or taught in schools. These people were basically saying that quarter of the Ukrainian population that is not from Western Ukraine, who are the superior Slavs, they believe that they were the Slavs that the Mongols didn't interact with to give them Mongol blood. So I mean, I'm hearing this crap all the time from the Ukrainians. It's really quite shocking. It's just like kind of stuff that was going on in the 1930s and 1940s in Germany, where they're talking about we're a master race of Slavs, and you Russians are not who have lived in Ukraine for all these hundreds of years. And it started this this is what happens when fascism comes back to Europe, and whatever form of fascism it is, if it comes back and takes a major state in Europe into control, it always starts a world war. That's what happened when you had Italy and Germany become fascist states. And then they helped the Franco in his civil war, which was kind of a rehearsal for World War II. It's where they tested their weapons and their new air forces. And then you end up having World War II. And now we are again in a World War III because there are fascists running Ukraine. And unfortunately, the Russians are Well, an interesting thing is happening. It, in this essay that I wrote, I the we've all this was written just after there was this huge demonstration, this huge escalatory attack that the Russians did about, let's see, when there was this strike of a school in Lugansk, which is now claiming identifying itself as Russian and has seceded from the Ukraine, just like Donetsk did, just like other Russian-speaking provinces like Zaporozhye and also Kherson. They have joined Crimea, which got out early when there was the Maidan coup. That I mean, I'll say it again because it's really it's important because you'll never hear this in the West. Vladimir Putin and the Russian diplomatic circles around him had actually negotiated with, I think, the French leader and the and other leaders, I think Germany and others, and also France and England, and they made an agreement because there were all these people demonstrating. It was one of the other color revolutions that America has done in Ukraine. After the orange one came the Maidan one, and so in the center of Kiev is this beautiful square where they literally camped in as winter came in and made barricades made of burning tires. It was quite a shot. And so these guys were living out there in the snow and the ice, and they were basically they started throwing Molotov cocktails at the guards and the policemen who were coming in. And the policemen were actually worse for wear than these people, so they were just there camped in, and they're not going to leave. And the problem was that they didn't. Dmitry Yanukovych was the president at that time. This is in 2013 into 2014. And this was the second time he tried to run as president, and this time he won. And his biggest problem was not so much that he was corrupt, like so many Ukrainian politicians are. You see, the situation that happened at the end of the first Cold War, the Soviet Union collapsed, and it collapsed into all kinds of corruption. Literally, there were people, oligarchs were like these mafia bosses, and they were just stripping the country and trying to sell it for the highest bidder. But then in 1999 came this little house elf toddling on beside the big drunken bear, President Yeltsin, who was suffering from last stages of alcohol disease and was but Yeltsin was an interesting character. It's like a lot of characters from Dostoevsky, Dostoevsky and Russians, you might say, that they also have their good sides, their sides of bravery. And one of the bravest and insightful things this drunken president did was pick this little guy called Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin from St. Petersburg, former mayor of St. Petersburg. And so he leads out the little guy, and this guy is looking scared, and he's like, you can clearly see that and I later found out he told Yeltsin, he said, I'm not ready for this. I mean, everybody, you all think that Putin is some kind of dictator like Hitler who wants to, straight arm out there and go everywhere. The first thing he said when power was handed to him is, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. And he says, well, I have, Yeltsin said, look, I have family members. My whole cabinet is a bunch of corrupt thieves, and they're going to destroy Russia in a few years. This country that has lasted for 1,000 years is not going to be with us anymore. I can't even trust my own family members, which I've also put in my government to do this right. So you're the one. Live with it. I've chosen you. You're the one. And of course, when I saw him, I thought, God, this guy's not going to, I don't know, this guy's going to be eaten alive. But a year later, he ran for prime minister and he won. And then he ran for president and he won. And in these winnings, he always would win by about, 60-40 or even a closer election. But what happened is that little guy literally slowly got the oligarchs out of power, and long story short, in 25 years, turned Russia around to the powerhouse, to the uh, economic powerhouse as well, and new modern army, new updated everything, updated nuclear defenses. I mean, if you watch Russia now, I mean, um, it's interesting because who's the black gal that's got everybody upset because she was a fan of Charlie Kirk? I can't think of her name right now. She's famous blogger. Um,
Miss Owens?
yeah, Candace Owens is in Moscow right now. And she's saying stuff on X. She said, I never expected to see such a beautiful city. And she took some shots out of her hotel and stuff. And I mean, Moscow is very beautiful. It is no longer the crumbling edifice of a dead Soviet Union. Even I was shocked several years back when I saw this flying over Moscow shot of how beautiful it is. It is truly the capital of the world, and a new kind of world that's developing through the BRICS nations, um, which has got, of course, all the powers of the Eldon times being very concerned. But the thing that's important in this thread I'm following here is that Ukraine became also an independent state around 1991 when the Soviet Union ended, 91, 92. And let's get something straight about this wives' tale that's going out there. Ukrainians keep complaining is, hey, we gave all our nuclear weapons to the Russians. No. What happened was Russia, the new Russian Federation, was what one time the Soviet Union uh, consisted of a because it was the changeover from the Soviet Union into the Russian Federation. Even the Western and other people agreed that it had not only the responsibility of guarding what was left of the Russian nuclear defenses and its missiles, which it pulled back into what was still constituting the Russian Federation, which was smaller than lost a lot of the stands in Central Asia, and Kazakhstan was a big hunk that left and became their own independent nations, although now they're kind of in a kind of union or a security alliance, Shanghai Security Alliance, and so which actually works, unlike NATO. And so they basically those weapons went back to what the former Soviet Union and the new Russian Federation, where they belonged. And of course, what was left behind in conventional reality is unfortunately a great tragedy for Ukraine since 2014, when there was a civil war that broke out because of the fascists paid by the United States, chosen by Victoria Nuland and Barack Obama to create a provisional government, which in 2014, I'll get back to where Putin was coming in from one side, these European leaders from the other. In February of 2014, they actually resolved the problem and peacefully ended the Maidan Square with all the demonstrations happening. And what was arranged is Yanukovych was pressured to agree to run for new elections, and everybody in Ukraine could have another crack at the elections and finding what they wanted in this. And it was scheduled to happen either later in 2014 or in the following year. But if people wanted to do it in this year, it was all done. Vladimir Putin was responsible for that. Vladimir Putin was chiefly responsible for that, and Russia added 15 billion to the 15 billion that the European leaders put in as a slush fund to help Ukraine calm down and get ready for new elections. However, um, the who's who of fascism in Ukraine, which were the people being picked, basically one of those people, Dmitry Yarosh, who at the time was the leader of a militia, the most virulent fascist militia in Ukraine, called Pratli Sector, which means right sector. They had the red and black flags. It's like the Ukrainian flag turned kind of possessed. rather than having the beautiful yellow for the wheat and the other band of sky blue for the beautiful skies over the yellow expanses of wheat fields in Ukraine. It's actually a beautiful symbolism in a simple bicolor flag. These people turned it into a red sky and a black earth. And the idea is the red is the blood of the National Socialist Ukrainians, the Bandera fascists, that they have shed to uh, fertilize the black earth of Ukraine. So it's really a very different kind of thematic. So very Hitlerian. But anyway, so these guys, they got up on the roofs and they did a false flag. They got up, they had a bunch of snipers on all the roofs looking down at the stadium-like square of Maidan. And I've seen the footage, and I've seen the movies of what happened. These guys up there in their red and black stamped helmets, right sector, sniped everybody down that was still down in the barricades. They shot their own people, they were just shooting anybody that moved. They killed over 100 and wounded 200. And so, in the confusion of that, other right sector people attacked the presidential palace, and Yanukovych and his government had to flee the country. And all of that was being planned by Victoria Nuland. We know this because she was caught on a FSB wiretap. That's the Russian Secret Service. It's new letters, not KGB. And talking to the ambassador Pryat, the American ambassador of Ukraine, and having this conversation, and they're picking who's going to be. No, we don't want. We don't not want the boxer to be ahead of this government. No, he's too independent. No, get Yasenyuk. We can work with him. He's also a member of National Socialist parties and stuff in Ukraine. And and so they picked, when I looked at the cabinet that they picked, especially the top six people who had all the military and Secret Service and censorship and all of that, I did a study on them. These people were the who's who of Ukrainian fascism, which they were kind of scary looking guys too. And I'm thinking, my God, so what happened is that our government, Obama, in this case, created the foundation of a provisional government that changed the rules and structures of Ukrainian law. That basically was the beginning of the end of democracy in Ukraine. I mean, Yanukovych, love him or hate him, was the last truly democratically elected president of Ukraine. And then after him was Poroshenko, who was another oligarch, chocolate candy oligarch. And he started the civil war against all the 20, the quarter of the Ukrainian population in eastern Ukraine, oblasts, provinces that that were uh, that were considered subhuman by this new government, who were really conjuring up the horrors that happened in Ukraine in the 1940s under Hitler's occupation, when most of the death camps were mostly serviced by Ukrainian Nazis. They did most of the dirty work of gassing people. It's Ukrainian Nazis that did all the shooting in Babri Yar, this arroyo, this little canyon that came out of the western part of Kiev, where first 20,000, 80,000, then hundreds of thousands of Jews. They 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 basically put out a proclamation and use the YID, if you understand, derogatory term, racist term, for all those YIDs out there. You are going to gather here in a certain place to be processed for your evacuation out of the region. So the SS officers were there. There's photos of it. All these people came in there. They were told to strip. It was November, I think. It was getting cold. And one by one, they were laid out face down on the ground to get a bullet in the back of the head. in there, tens of thousands. And most of them were shot by Ukrainian auxiliary Nazis to the SS. Um, and so this is a real dark story of Ukraine. They really don't want anybody to hear about it, but it's there. And it's such a thing. You know what's even lost? I have a contact that I watch her do a lot of things, blogs. I try to see both sides of everything as much as I can. And she took what I saw is there's this new museum about the war, World War II and all. And what I noticed is the emphasis was completely more on the people who resisted the Soviet Union, who were these fascists, than it was, and it didn't seem like it honored the 7 million Ukrainians that fought against Hitler and died in the Great Patriotic War. It was like, so I was watching how history was being rewritten as she was kind of innocently, maybe naively walking through the place and seeing, oh, this is new, this is interesting, it's different. And I was looking at, no, this is what's called, oh, we're going to change the narrative. And we're actually going to be, rather than embracing our grandfathers and great grandfathers, Ukrainian fathers who fought and died to kick the fascists out of Ukraine, we're kind of ignoring them, and we're talking about the people who resisted the Soviet Union. And it it's sad because it's true what they say about war. The first casualty is always truth, fact. It goes down first. So there is a link in this new uh, release that I just released to my subscribers. I also released it for my Hogue Prophecy Free Bulletin people as well, but this is a little more expanded version than what I gave them because of my subscribers paying for it. What I looked back in the archives. I'm going to mention the name. If anybody wants to cut to the chase, if anybody's brave enough to actually look at what you're not being told here in the West either about what's been going on since 2014, that created the Russians coming in to fight for those states that were going to be ethnically cleansed, who are Russian speakers, that has led us all to this current war that's now in its fifth year, which is now about to make a major escalation, maybe tonight, maybe overnight from Monday into Tuesday, but it's coming. But I'll get to that in a moment. I talked about it before in the last emergency report, and I talked about it on this show. What had happened was, um, it's odd that a few days after the Red Square demonstration happened on the 9th, the Zelensky unleashed his drone attack that he was planning with 1,000 drones and onto Moscow. It only a few of them got through, and I've come to understand a certain thing that drone operators in Ukraine get points for whoever they kill, or take out a truck or a tank or something like that. They get points, which means they get more, they get some swag, they get better equipment, they maybe get a little money. But what I'm noticing is I've been wondering, why is whenever the Ukrainian, these kind of smaller than a Cessna size large drones are looking like planes, and they fly the 400 kilometers to Moscow from the northern Chernihiv, which is the northernmost province of Ukraine. Um, they the ones that survive the Russians shooting them down or hitting them with electromagnetic scramblers and stuff, they always look like the guy piloting it is always got an intention that if he can't get into town, he looks for the nearest high rise and with great intention goes right into an apartment. And of course, what you can see is you can see people in the apartment, And so these drone operators, if they can't get into central Moscow, they will look to see if there's people in an apartment and they will take them out. And they're rewarded for that. This is a war crime. You don't, civilians can be in the crossfire, but you do not willfully go after them. I mean, of course, it's not as big an award as it would be taking out a Russian on a road with your drone, or chasing him around and then blowing him up, or uh, taking out a vehicle, or even sometimes when so many of these poor Ukrainian guys that are like 50, 40 or 50 years old that are being literally grabbed off the streets by 60,000 military police who, rather than fighting on the front, they're going around all through Ukrainian cities, um, getting out of vans and ganging up on like one guy, and they beat him down, and then they drag him in the thing, put him in the van. He gets maybe 2 weeks basic training, enough so he knows which side of the gun to point at the enemy. And he's then driven to the front and then given ammunition because they don't want him to use it on them. That does happen. And so these people who are hardly trained just end up being part of meat waves that charge over wide fields, getting pummeled by, the Russians have 10 times more artillery than the Ukrainians do. And that is why the casualties are so catastrophic. But also what happens is the with all the bad stuff I hear Ukrainian soldiers saying in the war correspondence about Russians, oh, they're muziks, they're mongoloids, they're this or that. I am surprised after all these years when I'm seeing Russian combat guys talking about them. They say, well, we respect them. They're badly led, but they fight hard. Just they're like us. They're like us. We consider them Russians because they fight like us, and they are like us. They're Russian Slavs, Kievan Russian Slavs, just like that was the birthplace for all Slavs, Russians, and those who think they're Western Ukrainian. And so what the Russians do is they have a special radio signal that they put out, and if you call it on your cell phone, they'll give you a place to go where you will be picked up and surrender to them, and then you'll be fed and clothed, and they're not abusing their prisoners. I have unfortunately a lot of footage of how Ukrainians abuse Russian prisoners. I've even seen them kill them. I've seen footage of that. So I have, for all the people that are wondering, oh, well, what's happening to Ukraine, which is terrible. What you'll find is, even in this huge attack that happened not that many days ago, which was what would have been the Russian counterattack to the Red Square. So both these things did happen, only they happened in the following days after Red Square celebration. And that's the one that was the biggest ever that hit Ukraine in the entire 4 years and 4 months of this war. It was huge. And there was also Oreshniks used, which is this new hypersonic missile. But they were fired at a little satellite town with a big industrial plant area. They were people while they were under attack in downtown Ukraine. They were taking cell phone movies and I have these in my articles. They're taking cell phone movies of these. It looks like a falling star, and that's the second stage of this hypersonic missile. And as it's falling, it's blazing because it's coming in at Mach 12, but it's slowing down because it's a huge. It's released. What it's released is six ranks, six ranks of these flame-like fingers coming in neat little rows. And these are the metallic cone kinetic warheads. They're heavy metal. It's not explosive. They're literally when you start seeing them glow with the plasma like a capsule in a reentry, that's why they're so bright, because they're coming in at Mach 12, 12 times the speed of sound. And so they're literally igniting the air with the friction as they getting into the thick atmosphere. So I made an estimate. The thick atmosphere of Earth, where it's truly atmosphere you can breathe, is 62 miles, in thickness from when you get to that final layer to hitting the deck, hitting the Earth. These things were flying these six ranks and groupings of lines, and they call it Oreshnik because have you ever seen the flowers of a hazelnut? Because that means hazelnut. So some rather poetic guy in the Russian engineers realized that if you see hazelnuts, flowers, they're like ganglia, little yellow glowing ganglia. And so when they're coming down in flames, they're like these ganglias coming down, and so that's where the name Oreshnik comes from. That's why sometimes people make the mistake that these 36 submunitions flying out of the rocket stage in terminal velocity at 36 bombs divided into six ranks. So they all go hit. It's like if this is the ground, the target, they're like slow motion. They're going boom, 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 boom. So they're digging. They dig. This is what makes them so deadly to underground bunkers, where, of course, Ukraine is dotted with them, and they're full of NATO, American, and German, and British officers and men. There's a whole lot of them there, and the warning now is that there's an even larger and sustained attack of Ukraine that's coming, which could come overnight or overnight in the next few days. That they basically said, we're going to go after all your decision centers. So the warning of the not the diplomatic foreign ministry, but the warning came this time from the Russian Department of Defense. So the generals were allowed to make the warning, saying we're going to come into central Ukraine with our attacks. They're going to be the largest you've ever seen. We are escalating this war for two reasons. One, the whole country has been ready for this escalation. Russians, 150 million Russians, have been very much impatient with the president of Russia. As much as they love him, he's very cautious. You will never hear that in the West. He's a lawyer. He's not Dr. Evil. He is a lawyer, a cautious guy, always goes by the book. He does not rule Russia with an iron fist. It is a presidential democracy, so a lot of power is given to the president, but it also has to go, these things that he does, he has to go to the Duma to get it approved. And he has to also deal with his Security Council, which are the people, the committee that he basically has to convince about his ideas. But if they don't go with it, he has to go with them. So, I mean, that's Russia's political reality. It's not Dr. Evil. Um, it's not cartoons. So in this essay, I wrote that rather than the Russians finally having had enough and collectively want, and this is because of this terrible thing that happened, the last of thousands of massacres I could cite since 2014. In fact, the link that I have in my thing, I really have a lot of warnings on it because it's extremely graphic. You're going to see war. You're going to see what Ukrainian fascists have been doing for 8 years in the civil war that was going on. Day and night bombing civilians in Russian cities, Ukrainian cities, their own citizens. But of course, they're not equal to them now. They're subhumans. Sort of like Goyim and the way Zionists and Goyim, when they look at people who are Arabs and Palestinians, they can do anything they like with them because they have no souls. Well, that kind of thinking is also very alive and well in Ukrainian Nazism. And um, so this one final attack, and it was clearly not. It was premeditated. They hit in Lugansk a school for girls, for teenage girls who want to grow up being teachers of children. It's called the Pedagogical School of Solobrisk or Sovietsk. I can't get the thing right, but it's in Lugansk. It's in the part of Ukraine that in September of 2022, about 5 months into the war, there were referendums that they had, and they all legally, those four oblasts that I talked about, they all legally became, in Russian law, states of Russia, provinces of Russia. Lugansk, Donetsk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson, along with Crimea, which did it back in 2014. And so these Russian provinces, which had never been a part of Ukraine until they were dragged in there by Lenin, and kind of thrown into Ukraine. They had been for 300 years purely Russian provinces. Same with Crimea. And so anyway, they never got asked if they wanted to be a part of Ukraine, and even the Western Ukrainians themselves never asked them to be there. So when Ukraine wanted to become a nation when it never has been a nation, I mean, Ukraina means hinterland or borderland. So, even the name is inferring borderland of what? Russia. Oh, you're the borderland of Russia. That means you're part of Russia. They should have at least changed the name because even in their own language, it means we're borderlanders. We have our own nation. Borderlanders of what? Oh, Russia. It's not quite working. So, what they did is in the middle of the night on the 21st of May, when all the girls were asleep, except some of them they launched three waves of 16 drones, suicide drones, high explosives. And some of the girls, when they had a moment, they turned on their phones and they were talking, like saying, I'm buried, I can't get out, and then they're destroyed. And so there were 21 girls and also some of their teachers that were killed and many other wounded. I have pictures of the block of the dormitory that was destroyed. Um, I don't know what it is about wars in this day and age, or this. You go strike Iran like Israel did and the United States on the 28th of February, and the first mass murder of is not Iranian soldiers, but 169 girls in an elementary school in Minab near Bandar Abbas on the Persian Gulf coast of Iran. Um, and they came in with U.S. Tomahawk drones, Tomahawk cruise missiles, and they hit one of the buildings. And the survivors then tried to go to the building where they all would do their 5 times a day their prayers. It's a Muslim school, and so they were then calling the parents to come take their children away from this terrible thing was happening, and they triple tapped them. It means where all the people, the firemen, everybody are coming, and then they made sure the second bunch of Tomahawk missiles took out a lot of those people. They did the same thing in this girls' school, the Ukrainian fascists did, with this Russian girls' school. And I don't know who was triggered worse, but I think, Vladimir Putin has two daughters, and he's very close to them and very protective of them. And I think finally, it wasn't the 150 million Russians that were suddenly now they want blood and they want to push hard. I mean, it's what happens with Russians. You can push them around, and you think, oh, they cross. They say you're crossing a red line, and we cross it, and they don't do anything, and so we cross some more. They look at their sanity and their restraint as weakness. But what happens is it's happened over 1,000 years of European invasions, and all the European invasions have it's been disasters for Europe, but they keep coming. They're in this again to break up Russia. And this time it could very well break up Europe. Karma finally comes around. It takes a while. So this hitting of this school, I can't speak for the 150 million Russians, but I can definitely acknowledge there's one Russian who finally made the turn, and that was the Russian president, who has tried so hard to stop the civil wars. He did Minsk 1 and 2 with European leaders to try to keep all those oblasts in Ukraine, not to break it up, and just to make an arrangement so that all the states inside Ukraine would have more autonomy. Now, if the Western Ukrainians want to do business with Europe, great. If the Eastern Ukrainians want to do more business and culture with Russia, okay. But so he was actually trying to keep the Ukrainian Union of Oblasts together. But what he found out is Angela Merkel and President Hollande of France, and Merkel was the Chancellor of Germany at that time. They admitted later, after the war started, that they were only buying NATO time to train hundreds of thousands of troops for their campaign to ethnically cleanse the eastern Ukrainian Russian oblasts of Ukraine in an ethnic push to push if the ones that didn't move would be killed and the rest millions would be forced to go into Russia and clear them out. That was clearly seen. That was what pushed the Russians to preempt that offensive just as it was starting in February of 2022. You will not hear that story if you're following Western media, but that's what happened. The bear was provoked to get into this civil war and with Nazis. And when you've been in a country, Ukraine being a big part of that once, which lost 7 million of its people, of the 27 million people that were killed in World War II in the Soviet Union by Nazis, people in Russia usually, unless they're part of Russia that becomes its own nation, becomes run by Nazis, um, they it's too deep in the tragedy, the memory. They will not let this thing stand. I mean, one of the key things of the SMO, the Special Military Operation, that Russia has been doing since 2022 is an unusual operation because it's kind of a war with kid gloves on. They didn't go to total war. In total war, if they had gone to total war, all Ukraine cities would be in ruins like Nazi Germany. All of its infrastructure would have been destroyed. All of its electricity parts would be destroyed. What they did is they preserved all that. They tried not to destroy cities. And in fact, even with this attack that happened on the 24th of May, of all the ordnance that was hitting military targets, factories, drone manufacturing, assembling places, in which the Ukrainians sometimes put them into big malls. Uh, I've seen this all through the war that the Ukrainian government doesn't care about its people being human shields. They'll put the HIMAR launchers. They'll put them in right up against multi-story apartments, even when Ukrainians are yelling down at them, says, "What the hell are you doing here? If they target you, we're all dead." And so a lot of times when there were major civilian casualties in Ukraine, it was because their own Patriot missiles. You shoot those missiles, those U.S. missiles that hardly hit a dam of anything. They got to come down, and they're large missiles, and they come down into Kiev and take out a block. And then they blame it on the Russians. Oh, look, this is a Russian missile. It's clearly a Ukrainian bought U.S. missile. Um, so the attack on the 24th after midnight was remarkably violent. But since this is an SMO, guess how many people were killed? I mean, no life lost is worth it, but only 6 because the Russians were not targeting civilians. They are waiting a long time now for now a because of the school attack. Now, uh, there's two things that are developing. Europe, since this new year started, Europe has been, its idiotic leaders have been talking themselves into openly saying, we're going to rebuild our armies. In fact, Merz, the head of Germany, Chancellor of Germany, he's saying, it sounds a little Hitlerian. He's saying, we are going to reconstruct the German Wehrmacht, I mean, not Wehrmacht, I mean Bundeswehr. And we're going to make again the largest army that Europe has ever seen. And you know that there's laws where Germany can't do that according to the surrender terms of World War II. He should be arrested by the United Nations because this is going. Germany's never supposed to have an army again like that because of Hitler. Yeah, and the demilitarization of Germany happened. That's the same thing that the Russians are going to do to the Ukrainian Nazis, demilitarize them, denazify them. Um, just like what happened at the end of the war. But rather than that, what's happening is you got France, you've got Germany, and you've got Britain. Two of those are nuclear powers, each with a roughly 300 nukes apiece, Britain and France. They're now openly with the EU and Kaya Kallas from Latvia, where people are insanely hating Russians there, including 1/4 of their population, which is Russian in the Baltic states. And they're all persecuted for decades since the end of the Cold War. Now, there's another thing happening where they're basically told if you don't speak Latvian, we will take your jobs away and do all of that. And so they go around to some old retirees and say, if you can't speak Latvian or Lithuanian or Estonian, you lose your citizenship. So there's been a law that's just been passed by the Russian Duma, the parliament, which says we are now declaring, because Russia is not just a country, it's a kind of civilization. This is very old, since Kiev was the birthplace of it, the current capital of Ukraine, that now there's a rule because so many Russians ended up at the end of the Soviet Union living in other countries that now there's a new rule that if the government of those other countries start persecuting Russians, the mother Russia will attack the people persecuting Russians, and is directly directed to um, Ukraine as well. And so there's this link I have in here from 2015, early part of the Civil War. In deep winter, you will see, um, well, actually, you will see something in 2015 that happened with this guy called American expatriate who married a Russian woman, has 3 boys. He lives in Lugansk. His name is Patrick Lancaster. He is an amazing war correspondent. He has been there since the beginning. He's fortunately still alive. He survived some real close calls. But one of them was the link I have in here with all the warnings about how graphic it is. In the link, you will see in the central part, just when people are at the main time when everybody's at the supermarkets and stuff. Ukraine did what it often did. It launched a Toshka U ballistic short-range missile, um, which unleashed cluster bombs all across the main square and the adjacent seats of the center of Donbass. Um, and so he hearing the sirens, he's seeing the smoke, he's putting on his vest and his helmet, and he's just a block or two away from where he lives. He turns the corner and sees an absolute carnal house, body parts everywhere. He climbs into a bus that's all its glass windows have been broken, and there's all these dead people in it, mostly babushkas and old guys. It is terrible, and you must come and see it. I know It's not easy, but if you want to understand, I mean, in prophecy, what I do is often what Hermes Trismegistus, the ancient prophet of the Egyptian Greco mystics, um, he said, we try with prophecy to avoid bad futures, but it is good to know the future because if it's not avoided, at least you'll understand why the blow came at you like it did, why the blow's coming to American hegemony, why the blows of Zionist Israel have set in motion possibly the destruction of Israel and certainly the very rapid end of the United States as a global power. Um, and I think, at least from my experience, I think it's important to understand the blow. I think it's important to see this video if you can. If you can't, that's fine. But be brave if you can. See what for 8 years was happening to Russians in Ukraine. And then you'll know why this war is happening. I think that video that I've got is one of the worst, but I've seen hundreds of these videos of hundreds of massacres daily of civilians, no military assets anywhere near it. And he's been there. And if there's ever a Nuremberg trial, the thousands of hours of Patrick Lancaster's footage is going to damn all the leaderships of Ukraine that passed into that demonically possessed space of being ruled by fascism. Because it's the same stuff that happened with Hitler and the Holocaust and all that. It's a Russian Holocaust. And at least 14,000 civilians were killed in those 8 years. Um, because this is all important, this is all rather elaborate backstory that I'm trying to say. And it's a little bit of like what this article does. People read me because I give you the backstory. I want you to understand the blows that have happened and the blows that are coming so that you know the backstory, that you do that rare thing now in this information age that should actually have it happen all the time, that you get to see the other guy. And for a while, through your cell phone and your laptop, you get to be in their shoes. You get to have that compassion to know if you have an enemy, it's good to get into their shoes to see how they are, why they got to where they are. Because someday you might go down the same dark hole in your own life if you follow a life of denying what's going on around you that impacts your life and your nation's life and the world's existence. So anyway, that's there. And Putin has the worm has turned with Putin. He is finally, if anybody has been trying more not to start these wars, it's Vladimir Putin. But you would think that he was the backstory to all of them, that he was eagerly wanting to conquer Europe. They don't want to do anything with Europe anymore, Russia. But Europe can't let them go. They still want another try. All these people in Europe are leading Europe and saying, we're going to prepare to go to war with Russia by the year 2030. You got leaders in the EU saying it. You've got NATO European leaders saying it openly. Now, this is so childish because what makes you think the Russians going to sit back and let you prepare that military invasion and attack of Russia by 2030? They're going to hit you now when you have no armies because you gave all those weapons to the Ukrainians, and along with about 1 million of them, they are now all rusted hulks across Ukrainian Russian battlefields in this war. You gave them all your missiles. Uh, you've given them, and also you have been guiding, you Europeans have been guiding all these bombs, all these missiles through your own telemetry, that you have built for the Ukrainians, that you have given to the Ukrainians. That makes you part of this war. And what is going to happen and what's any day now, there's going to be a demonstration that it might take out the center of Ukraine, its government buildings, and all of its underground bunkers where lots of NATO officers are going to die in these places because it's been going on. They've tried to keep it under taps, but it's not going to. I mean, Ukraine, Europe has been in this war since 2022. There's at least the Polish armies were sending entire battalions as mercenaries. It's an odd thing to see 800 guys as mercenaries in a battalion, and what they were trying to get combat experience. At least 7,000 Poles, at least a few thousand Americans, and a lot of top brass too, have died in this war, um, trying to pretend to be Ukrainian mercenaries. And so, what will happen next is a potential escalation. Hope we're going to see now from next week and into the summer, we're going to see this war in Ukraine escalate. The proxy label is going to drop off of Ukraine. It's going to be Ukraine and Europe and all the European nations that are arming it are now part of this war. The Russians are going to it is possible, and I've been warning of it in my Hogue prophecy reports since September 2022. In my next set of articles, I will document all the warnings of demonstrations of escalation. And what that may mean is that the Russians now are 20 years ahead of the Americans in hypersonic technologies. And some of their avant-garde missiles that go 29, Mach 29, as well as the Mach 12 Oreshniks. Um, I have a map in this article where you see there's about 40 different manufacturing centers from Italy to Spain, and a lot in Germany, and a lot in Britain and France. Uh, all those have been listed. The Russians put out a report where they listed all their targets. The Europeans are going to send another 16,000 drones to Ukraine so that Ukraine can launch into Russia 1,000 drones a day. What the Russians are going to do and could do, they'll announce it because you won't be able to do anything in Europe. Between 5 and 12 minutes, all their hypersonic missiles will take out all of those bases across Europe. Europe will be under fire. Europe will be in this war, as it's been rather cowardly in funneling all this stuff to Ukraine. I mean, we're even notorious enough here in America that some of our senators, like the senator of South Carolina, more than once has openly said on Fox, without any problems or shame of it, he says, "Yes, we're going to get the Ukrainians they're going to fight the Russians to the last Ukrainian." He said it twice. I heard him say it twice. Yes, to the last Ukrainian. That's how we'll hurt the Russians.
This is Lindsey Graham.
Lindsey Graham. Yeah. Yeah, Lindsey. I watched him say it out loud, after he's had a few, because usually I don't think he's ever been sober for the last few years. And he says, yeah, yeah, to the last Ukrainian. That's what we're going to do. Yeah. It's like, doesn't he have any sense that there might be Ukrainians hearing that and saying, what? It's like, we're going to go after China if it takes the last American to destroy China. What do you think, you Americans, if somebody had that in mind for you? And I mean, it just reminds me to the old absurdity that began in Vietnam, where a general, when the Vietnamese village was destroyed and all its people killed, a man would stand there with his big brass shoulders shining and say, "We had to destroy that village to save it." Literally, people said that. It's documented. Now, I've taken that concept and I've moved it a little farther. We've evolved it now in our hegemonic period where we go into Libya after Libya surrendered its nukes and surrendered its missiles as a price of coming back into the civilized world. The United States, that was Gaddafi doing that. We fought this war, got ourselves in a war with France and Britain and with us, killed Gaddafi, wiped out his government, and now, ever since 2011, in October when that war started, it has now become a completely destroyed nation. It's like, and so I could hear the next generation of American generals saying, "Well, we had to destroy that nation to save it." It's a ruin. And the people are like back in Mad Max zones, like it's a beyond Thunderdome down there. Thank you very much. Um, now the biggest one we're doing that with is, we have to destroy Iran to save it too. We ought to save it from the evil Ayatollahs and all. So we're going to, destroy it to give it freedom. And the same thing is going on with the Europeans. And the problem is a bully always ends up, if he keeps fighting, his luck runs out and he finally starts pushing somebody who can push back. And the Iranians are just the people to push the American aggressors back. And they've done it quite well. And I'm about to finish now with this rant. Um, my future reports are going to be talking about the potential of demonstrations by the Russians with the idea of scaring these idiots who are running Europe straight and maybe getting them to relent and stop this and start negotiating and ending this. There is one problem, which I didn't address in this article that I just released, but will in future ones in depth. There's a statement I've said often on this show, which I think rings true for the situation that have been in and what will be coming. Is Einstein once said famously, the difference between um, mediocrity and genius is that genius knows its limits. So there's a guy named Sergei Karaganov who is a well-known aide or advisor to Soviet presidents and also to Vladimir Putin. And Putin has publicly said that he does not agree with Karaganov on this idea, but he's kind of coming around to it. Karaganov says the problem with these people in the West, I mean, we're moving east. We want to turn our backs on Europe. We're now, and we see ourselves as a Eurasian nation, Russia, with a European half, which is 1/4 of Europe in size. And his idea is we'll first start conventional, these demonstrations, and then go to tactical nukes. If they're not scared with the conventional things we can do, we have to move to tactical nukes. Now, I agree with Scott Ritter, one of my longtime sources. He says you just never use nuclear weapons. Never. Because if Russia initiates using tactical nukes, these idiots will go to tactical nukes. Yeah, you Russians are making a big mistake if you think that mediocrity knows limits. You're the geniuses. You're the military geniuses winning this war. It's your fault if you presume idiots are going to know, like your genius and insight, your limits. So the real danger is these fools might just respond to the Oreshniks and the non-nuclear weapons with a tactical nuke. And that's the end of all of us. So I'm not feeling that looming. I always make that point because I did feel it at the end of Biden's presidency. There was an issue. I don't have to go into it again now. But I'm not yet feeling that dread that I had in the Cuban Missile Crisis when I was in the last 13 days of my 6th year on this planet. Um, but I'm watching carefully. I've been saying now since this year started that the next 2 years, 2016, 2017, are going to be the most decisive and most dangerous in human memory. So we're not even halfway through these 2 years, these 24 months that started with New Year's. And this will be one of many potentials where the human race might rush up and with eyes wide open fall into these catastrophes, mainly because they're so misinformed. Uh, so we're about to enter a real big effort that could end up that way. It may not. And what I'm trying to do is my little bit to enlighten people about these things by telling you stuff you're not going to hear in your news. That's true. And I can give you the sources to test if it's true or not. You shouldn't just blindly believe me any more than you want to blindly believe Zelensky or Putin or anybody else or Fox or CNN. Don't be sheep. You're human beings, thinking, reasoning human beings who love. Don't be instinctive animals. So, you have some questions?
Don has the mic. So Don, unmute.
Okay. Thanks, John, for that information. Can I ask you also some questions about because you were talking about Ukraine with Shokin. With Poroshenko, he's on the phone call with Biden, and Biden's trying to shut Shokin down because he's investigating Burisma. What is your I guess take on that interaction?
Well, it's an outcome. Thanks, Don. It's an outcome of something I kind of got lost in my thread, but I'll bring it back in now. Is that Russia was just as corrupt as Ukraine was at the end of the Cold War. The problem for Ukraine is the blessing for Russia is Putin ended most of the corruption. The problem with the leadership that took Ukraine into this experiment of being a country is the corruption just got worse. Ukraine, when it became a nation officially in 1991, had a population the size of France and an economy potential the size of France. Pretty major. I think like 45 million people. It was actually the size of France, pretty much. And what then happened was the oligarchs, they weren't overthrown like they were by Putin in Russia. They got stronger. And they have been slowly selling off the country, making money off of it until Ukraine is deficient in so many ways. And the people are, I mean, even the officer corps are literally labeling people missing on the battlefield when they know they're dead so that they can pocket the money that goes to their families and get rich off of it. Because a lot of people are dying on the Ukrainian side, a lot more on the Russian side. And it's a real sad thing because they're brave, just as brave as any Russian, but just terribly led. So to kind of cut to the core, Don, about this issue of Poroshenko, it's just another, and especially in his interactions. I wrote an article actually about that when Biden later, after he was president, openly admitted his nepotism in front of a bunch of people. I think we're talking about that incident, because Biden was part of the corruption. Biden just loved Ukraine. He was the viceroy. Obama's our viceroy for this new fascistly established Ukraine, and he even got made sure that Hunter Biden got a nice job in Burisma, which is, for people who don't know, the one of the well, it's like Gazprom in Russia. It's like the main people that do natural gas piping and sending in Ukraine. and he was getting, I think, $25,000 a day or a week or something for just being there. Why, he had no experience at all in business or stuff, but if you're the son of the president of the United States, this sounds like how Ukraine really does business, through corruption. And I actually did an article back when all that was happening for the Hogue Prophecy Report, where I mean, there are people in Ukraine who, in the government even, who are trying to fight corruption. Very brave, very lonely people. And this guy who was Poroshenko's investigator of corruption, he was really finding the goods on Hunter Biden and the corruption. And then the story goes that Biden was, in a few hours, was going to get in his jet and go back to Washington. And he said, well, okay, I don't like this guy. This is a real mean guy that's going after my kid and going after Burisma. And I'm going to tell you right now, that $1 billion I said you're going to get? I'm not going to give it to you. He said this right to Poroshenko's face. He says, but you promised. He says, no, you're not going to get it. You're going to get it if you fire that guy who's going after my son in Burisma. You got an hour to choose. I'm getting on the plane. So what happened is Poroshenko calls up that lonely anti-corruption guy and says, look, it's for the sake of your country. We need that $1 billion. Of course, he probably needed to gouge a lot for himself. We need that $1 billion. So you gotta take a fall for the country. I'm gonna have to officially fire you. And so that's kind of what happened. I had all the evidence. I had his report. I translated in English, and it's there in my archive somewhere. And I could tell you stories.
John, just to bring it to relevancy, because I think Paul asked you. You were talking about Candace Owen. She just interviewed Hunter Biden, and now she's going to Russia. So I find it interesting because I thought she was very soft on Hunter Biden. So it's interesting to see what exactly is behind the timing of this, because there was no difficult questions asked about his involvement, Burisma, Metabiota, of course, with I believe his involvement with some of the bioweapons programs that was developing in Ukraine. So this seems to me like Ukraine just was this rogue state in which these old bioweapons lab, perhaps some human trafficking. There just seems to be a nexus for criminal activities.
Oh, it's absolutely. There are 24. The CIA established 24 of those biolabs. And early in the war, within the first month, the Russians were reporting, they were showing the documents, they were showing people some of the biolabs where this stuff was going. I saw it. I saw the papers, I saw the documents. And, because the Russians actually captured some of those biolabs before they could be destroyed. So, Ukraine is the most corrupt country in Europe and may very well be the most corrupt country in the world. At some point, somebody argued and defended that Ukraine was not as corrupt as some Central African country, and the people in that Central African country said, "Don't compare us to Ukraine. That's how bad it is." So go ahead.
Because I appreciate your take on this, because I would just question whether or not I just was at a party the other day, and nobody has an understanding of Ukraine. It's just, so your take on it, if I were to bring up your position, which I agree with, I just think people give me the blank stare. And my question is, the other interesting thing that I thought was being reported, of course, the Russians were presenting the biological weapons to the UN, and they were showing the connection to Hunter Biden, Metabiota, and so forth. The Avestal plant is interesting to me, because it was my understanding that was one of the first things that sort of the Russians targeted as an area to explore because of what was underneath the plant. And I imagine because the construction of that facility, it would allow for underground coverage for all types of activities.
Here's the thing, just to interject here. It's a common thing when you look at all the Kuchevska high-rise apartments. They're all kind of look the same. It's from the Soviet period. And they built those things to withstand nuclear bombs. And Avestal, I wasn't there, but I've seen reporters that went all through the labyrinth and multi-stages deep into the earth. It was a profoundly like 8 floors down. And Azov, what was left of the Azov brigade, which was terrorizing Mariupol for all those 8 years, when the Russians, it was the first major city that the Russians and the Russian Donetsk troops got into and fought there. And one side thing happened to that is I just heard that sounds interesting is the whole concept of the Oreshnik being born as a penetrator was first considered because the Russians were sending their bombers over. I saw when Patrick Lancaster was actually filming them dropping their Buster bunker, these huge bombs to try to get all the Azov people inside all the underground network of Azovstal. This is a huge ironworks that's next to Mariupol. It was during the Soviet times.
And my 6 degrees of separation, that's where our iron ore, the pig iron for our facility we buy from was from the Azovstal site. So it created a huge supply chain disruption to the iron industry here in the United States.
Yeah, it's no, I mean that's why the Ukrainian Nazis wanted to clean out all those subhuman Russians from Donbass and Donetsk, because that was the industrial base of Ukraine, heavy industries. There's coal mines and gas and salt mines all through that area in Donbass region, which is Donetsk and Lugansk. And I don't know how many times I heard these people being interviewed by Patrick Lancaster. He speaks fluent Russian, so I was watching the subtitles, and they'd be in the middle of the Battle of Azovstal and the Battle of Mariupol. It was like Stalingrad, except for there were a whole lot of dead civilians. Most of them were emerging from the basements because the basements were also bomb-proof in those apartment buildings. And when they'd come out, the Azov people pick them off. Men, women, grannies. I saw it. And I think the worst thing I saw was when he was going with a guide, Russian soldier officer, and him were going into an abandoned Azov basement where they had their main headquarters in one part of Mariupol. And then they come across this. It's all this. They stripped off all their emblems and stuff so they could like disappear in civilian clothes and stuff. Rather cowardly of them, these guys. All this SS paraphernalia, Hitler pictures, swastikas, and he stumbles upon this woman who is dead, a young, beautiful woman. Once was beautiful. Her face was completely covered in blood from beating. She was clearly raped, and they burned a swastika into her belly. It's just like and the way Patrick is so human. He's just like, oh my God. And so fascists always are the same. It doesn't matter whether Ukrainian or Imperial Japanese or, take your pick. It's a bestial, or if they're Zionists, the new fascists on the block. They just do terrible things, and there's no way to negotiate with them. They have to be defeated. We try to negotiate.
John, do you think it's the interesting thing in the United States, what you're calling the fascists seem to be these neocons? Do you think there's a threat to Putin's power structure that with neocons within the Russian government?
Well, no, no, because it's a little different. I mean, yeah, there definitely there's been a lot of people that Karaganov is actually, one of his advisors. Um, and Putin has at any one time 70% to 85% popularity. Can you imagine anybody in the West that can even dream of that? American president with that much. Hasn't happened since Reagan or something. So, um, he was the man that got them out of hell, got them out of being another Ukraine, corrupt to the core. So people have memories in Russia. People are historically literate about not only you talk to a Russian, he knows your history a lot better than we know ours. It's pretty remarkable. So anyway,
I say that because we mentioned Lindsey Graham, because he was calling for the open assassination, which is insane from a American diplomat calling for the assassination of an elected leader. That went really without any type of criticism.
yeah. Well, because everybody's drunk the same Kool-Aid as Lindsay. Of course, he has had a little more alcohol in it, but the the and I love to drink too, but you can get too much with it, um, so anyway, the um, the this I talk a lot about this in this new article that you know people love Putin, but they people can are openly critical when they've always Putin has always been unlike how he's been sold by the United States press and the English press and all that. The peacemaker, the one that you want there, is not Medvedev and not the other people. He has balanced that. He's the moderate in his government, and they respect him. And as far as anybody, this is another important milestone because you talked about how Graham was saying somebody should shoot him. I've heard that so much on Fox. You got General Unkind and some of those people, some of those old degenerate guys should go retire. Um, they're talking like it's World War II. Actually, a lot of our thinking military hasn't adapted to the 80 years of change that's happened in the world. But the thing is, there was a thing that happened at the end of last year, which was the first big step for Putin turning around and pulling the gloves off. He was in Valdai, we think. He was in Valdai in his residence there outside of Novgorod. It's near St. Petersburg, so far north Russia. And he loves to go there, especially in the winter to cool down. And this place has one of the major strategic bunkers that if he's there and World War III starts, he can fight it from there. So he's on the phone with Donald Trump, and it's the whole, you got the two realtors, who have no sense of diplomacy at all. This is not a real estate deal. They're the Witless and
Kushner.
Kushner, yes, Kushner. Anyway, I'll move on from that. The He's on the phone and they're debating stuff with the Iranians. This is before they did the thing. Anyway, they're doing one of the negotiations, and then Trump's on the phone with Putin and says, "Okay, stay where you are, stay by the phone." Because I'll be able to update you in a couple hours what's happening in Oman, where they were negotiating with the Iranians. So, around the time he said that, and over the next 2 hours, hundreds of drones came out of northern Ukraine, flying over Russia, 500 kilometers, all aimed at Valdai. And most of them were shot down. A lot of them got right up to it and were shot down. And what the Russians did is they picked up all the shot down drones. They took them back in the defense ministry and they had recovered all the main computer brain chips of them, the ones that weren't destroyed. And what they did is they opened those chips up and produced all the information to show that this was a US job, just using Ukrainians to launch them. Guided by US satellites, guided by US guys in bunkers somewhere to assassinate Vladimir Putin. Not just assassinate him, but they would be attacking a nuclear installation command center, which they should well know that in the Russian nuclear doctrine, if you do that, if you're attacking the command centers, Russia will launch everything at you. This people in this country and people in the West have forgotten what nuclear war can do. The people are running the country. The people understand that. But the people that are running their countries into the ground have lost their connection. And I can understand why Karaganov says we got to blow one off to make them remember what a terrible thing this is, and not go further and resolve these things. Otherwise, we're all dead in a very horrible way. The end of our civilization. The northern hemisphere turned into a cinder.
Can I ask you another question?
Okay.
Especially with Paul here, what is your understanding of the biological weapons development? Are we at a point where it's Pandora's box, where once it's this you can't put it back in the box. It's out there and it's moving. And in the case, if you're looking at it as a strategic weapon, you're going to have to develop soldiers that have some type of sort of synthetic biology in which you can do updates to this sort of directed evolution of the biological weapons development in these sort of AI systems. Do you see how this ends or how this continues?
Well,
what do you see happening here? Because to me, it seems the biological weapons is the main thing we should be talking about, but the nuclear weapons and tactical nukes seem to be more kinetic, therefore more exciting, but it's the biological weapons that concern me.
No, it worries me to hear you say that about nuclear weapons, because that shows also some of the disconnect that people are having because of people not being reminded. No, biologicals are certainly bad, but we're talking about, maybe I have to do some articles where I show people what exactly the unthinkable looks like. And no, the nuclear, they're not just kinetic, they're radioactive. They, what will happen, maybe a half a million, maybe 500 million people will die from the blast effects of nuclear detonations in a full-scale nuclear war, but most of the people will die from the radiation. And it's a horrible way to die. And it's funny, in 1980s, I was in the Oregon Commune then, and actually one of those years, Osho had predicted that there was going to be a nuclear war in 1983. There was a danger. And so he was going to ask Manan Sheila if there was a way we could build underground cities on our ranch to, wait it out. And it was quite a thing because this is the moment that I really changed my life when somebody from the sign department, I was the guy who would dig the holes and put the signs up, came up to me. Oh, Osho made this interesting talk about stuff and nuclear war potentials and all that. And I looked down the hole and remembered that I had the one book left from my 2,500 book library that I sold off. I remembered that I kept the Nostradamus book by Erica Cheatham. I never knew why. I thought I was going to toss it, but I said, I'll keep it. I don't know. It's the only one I kept. And then I went home after that day and I started looking in the prophecies, and that was the beginning of everything that's happened since. 53 books later and thousands of articles in 22 languages. That whole bit began in that year, and that year actually had a brush. That was the year when Reagan did the evil empire speech to a whole bunch of holy rolling evangelical doomsday cult and Christian nationalists. And the Russians made the Soviet leadership made the misunderstanding of that. They thought he'd lost his marbles and was going to strike Russia in some biblical, to fulfill some madcap biblical prophecy. Boy, does that sound similar to some certain people in Israel and other places in Christian nationalism that see this war with the Palestinians, this Holocaust against the Palestinians, as Amalek from the Old Testament, where you wipe out a whole race of people because God told you to. And so the thing is that I'm saying that we dodged the bullet because the Russians were ready to first strike on us from Reagan's speech. But fortunately, Gorbachev, who was the protege of Andropov, who was one of the final aged premiers of Soviet Union, and they're all dying one after the other. He told Andropov, he said, "I think he was just talking. He's an actor. He was talking to the audience what they wanted to hear." And so the Russians didn't strike us. And later that year, when a SAS Korean airliner got off track and started flying over Sakhalin, Soviet territory, it was shot down by a MiG-29. And that almost started World War III. So, so there's a lot of um, the big danger to get back to the biology weapons are bad. In fact, what's even worse, what's even more potentially equivalent to is what stupid stuff that created the gain of function in the coronavirus. All those guys in North Carolina labs who also went down into China and Wuhan to work with the Wuhan labs because they had all the bats not far from Wuhan, which were great objects for doing gain of function stuff with the coronavirus. And you wonder, you know why the ticks that are totally infesting upper Midwest, Wisconsin and stuff, it's called Lyme disease. It's because there was a lab in Lyme, Connecticut, that I think they were doing gain of function on the blood ticks, and they made a very powerful new one, and now it's all spread all over the place with a very harsh gain of function. So any act of gain of function should be banned because it will get out. You know that as many as 10 million people died from the cure for the coronavirus. It's coming out. That's as many. That means this virus, which was artificially strengthened by us with cures that had the audacity to think that we can shut off your own natural immune system and put our own one in there. Um, that means we killed the same amount of people that World War I killed in the trenches across the world.
And the numbers are continuing to grow.
Yes, and then there's the turbo cancers.
Right.
There's also the other thing is how many tens of millions more are going to have shortened lifespans because of this. So, I wrote a book that's still not published because I wrote it in 2020 when I was having all these insights that science later backed up, looking at Nostradamus's plague prophecies. And I haven't published it yet. I thought I'd get to, but we're in such a witch hunting world right now, which is, as Osho used to say, my master said, the greater plague is not the plague that kills people, it's the plague of fear that overtakes the world and hysteria. And I don't know if I publish that book on Amazon, they might ban all my books. So I'm going to publish it through my own website. and people can read it from there and get hard copies from it from there, because it's still, it would be stupid to have the whole door shut on me just because of someone else's hysteria. But I'm still going to get out there, and hopefully you
And
all.
John and Paul, ask me both you guys. Do you see this idea of this direct evolution that's happening in silico? And I call it like what's happening, this digitization. Looking at tokenization of the assets. We're creating this metaverse, sort of an abstraction of the natural world. And the same thing is, it gives an excuse to move into synthetic biology. Right. And so therefore people like Sun Chung, who essentially, was a billionaire who had access to alert the public, but basically is now saying, well, I didn't agree with the rollout of this experimental genetic therapy. But now that it's out, it's creating these turbo cancers, which he's seeing in young children. Now he has a prescription essentially to help. Is it pushing us? It will push us naturally into synthetic biology, and perhaps it will allow for us to move into like this Kurzweil's singularity moment. We merge with the machines. I kind of feel like this virus and the things you're talking about, these immune deficiency diseases that came out of, I saw Dr. Traub out of the Nazis, that would led to what happened in Lyme. There seem to be multiple vectors of chaos, and it's happening now in the labs, and it's not happening in a normal sort of a Darwinian evolutionary sense. It's happening in a digitization and a simulation that you can't keep up with it. So therefore, you're going to have to create code against code.
Right. Well, let me just
Yeah, go ahead.
So Don, I did a series a few months ago called Bioweapons in Foreign Policy. And the reason why I did that was to tip my hat to Kissinger, because back in the 50s, he wrote a book called Nuclear Weapons in Foreign Policy. And going to the question you originally made about nuclear weapons versus biological warfare, the kinetic event of nuclear weapons and the long effects of radiation increases the probability that there will be rational actors stepping back from the abyss. Also, the barriers of entry for nuclear weapons is very high. Now, with biologics, the barriers of entry are very low. So the chances of something to happen is much higher than actually nuclear. Yeah. And in addition, with nuclear, there's this flash event. Yeah. With biologics, there's this cycle of mutation that happens in the wild now once it's released, that can't be planned perfectly. And there can be some sort of negative externality that takes place because of it. Now, I highly recommend people that are listening to this show to go to my different channels. I have 8 different channels out there. Listen and pay attention to the actual content that I created called Biological Warfare or Biological Weapons in Foreign Policy. I have about 4 or 5 different videos about it. But it goes into detail about why it's happening and how the military-industrial complex is going to benefit from it, because it's building an annuity. Going to this whole tokenization that you're talking about, and AI and in silico development, there is more money to be made in creating biologics and the shield to protect from them than building nuclear weapons. In addition, because of artificial intelligence and the development of systems in silico, you can run these simulations much quicker than natural evolution. So we're speeding. It is natural. It is. You have Darwinian evolution in the wild, but you can have Darwinian evolution sped up in silico. And because of that, we are going to rapidly develop a whole series of therapies, but also weapons that mankind can't even fathom.
Yeah.
And then going to the question about synthetic biology, it's already happening. There are labs in process where they're not just mutating viruses, they're making them from scratch. Vendor, which was one of the major researchers that helped sequence the genome, and he was the one that really pushed for the shotgun sequencing method for the human genome. He has a company that's literally doing this, making cells from scratch. So synthetic biology is happening now. This is not like sci-fi. It's happening now. You can take someone that has a decent amount of education in molecular biology and make a virus from scratch and design it any way you want. You can make the envelope, the spike protein, determine what sort of proteins you want it to code within the cell. You can make it from scratch. That's the level of specificity that we have now in the laboratory. It's not just back in the early days of COVID. When I say the early days, I'm talking about 2001, when Barrick started playing around with the SARS platform. He could only modify. But now with CRISPR and synthetic biology, we can design a brand new virus from scratch. So we're already there. So this is where I keep on saying, you know what, these biological labs, we have to, there are benefits with this because you can create therapies for different diseases, but it's dual purpose. And because it's dual purpose and you have nefarious actors that can make lots of money, there's going to be harm that takes place, either accidental or on purpose. And this is the reason why I did that series on biological weapons in foreign policy, because it is becoming a foreign policy tool.
So it just this is all true, and it's very it has a link. Do you see the link with this? I've often for decades I've been saying there are three ways in which the human race can destroy itself and may willfully turn itself extinct. The one is nuclear war, but I said it's the third worst. The second, which is much worse, is the slow train wreck called global warming and the sixth mass extinction that's going on. But I've been saying since 1990, I used to call it virtual enlightenment. That was my name for AI, artificial idiocy. I said, head and shoulders above those others. We can survive those other two catastrophes. But the one that could really get us down, and it's definitely got its biological dimension to it because it's the same Frankenstein mindset, Dr. Frankenstein mindset that's in the people that think they can win a nuclear war with a big kinetic boom, or they think they can make new, like you're saying, some for good, some for weapons, biological things that literally turn everybody into a Frankenstein monster. Um, so yes, in a way, I have to agree with you. The kinetic has our attention much more than the thing that's more subtle.
Right, and I think there's an awful lot of funding from DARPA into Stargate that's actually helping to fund the biological weapon development in silico, but also hypersonic weapons and other types of military weaponry, maybe dealing with artificial intelligence or autonomous drones or whatever. But DARPA is heavily going in this direction.
Yeah.
And you're going to have
And that
lots of
passages
people
in the
out there.
book about that.
And here's the problem in academia. to be able to do the research, they need the grant from the government. So if
Yeah.
they can, they may go, you know what, for them to survive in academia, they'll do all these papers or do this research for the government, and all of a sudden, you know, the government takes over and starts using the weaponry. I mean, in a strange way, Oppenheimer was fixated on being able to understand the atom,
Yeah.
right? And I think the way the movie Oppenheimer, the recent one, portrayed Oppenheimer was that near the end, he didn't fully understand how the government was going to take the technology and run with it, and just throw the scientists to the wayside. He thought that the scientist, my interpretation of the movie is that he thought the scientists could maybe circle around and kind of protect the technology from the ones that shouldn't be using it. All right. Now, maybe I'm looking too deep into the movie, but the point here is that I am extremely scared of individuals in our government playing around with things like biological weapons and the low barrier of entry to even rogue states. Think just with this whole Iranian thing, independent of if you're for the war or not for the war. Just imagine if the IRGC is not destroyed by the United States because of the Shiite religion. It is very possible that in 10 or 15 years from now, because of the low barrier of entry, they develop a modified virus or a brand new virus in 1,000 square foot facility that no one can find, and release it and kill half the population. That's what we're dealing with here. We can design stuff that mankind has never, ever seen.
It is a potential, but I've studied deeply the Shia, the sect of martyrdom, and it's very likely that that just as the Ayatollah who was murdered by the Zionists and his family and all was moderate, this would also be considered haram, a just like, I mean, the Iranians also were the people that when the United States gave Saddam Hussein during the Persian Gulf War, the Iran-Iraq War, 1980, 1988, very bloody, violent wars, kind of like the Western Front in the desert. The About 100,000 Iranian soldiers were gassed to death by mustard gas and other gases that the Americans helped the Iranians create and use their satellites to target on the Iranians. And a lot of the Iranian the Revolutionary Guards were coming up to Ayatollah Khomeini, the first supreme leader of the Islamic Republic, and they were saying, "We need these weapons to fight back." And Khomeini said, "No. This is haram. This is evil. We will not make such evil weapons. And we will win it, this war, but not that way."
Maybe.
And so I think if you're looking at a culture which has lasted 4,000 years, has not been like us short flash in the pan civilizations that seem to flare up and burn out. They've survived a lot, and I put my hope in that their religious views will prevent that from being done.
Okay, with the Shia and the Sunni religion, they have religious leaders. I grant you that.
Mm-hmm.
And the religious leader may actually say, because of some doctrine, don't do this. Yeah. But you have a group of people that spin off that are crazy. And they may be able to have the technology or procure the technology to do this.
Well,
and the thing that the Ayatollah did state to the world is going to be set on fire. Now, we assume it's nuclear. I think it's a fever. And a fever is due to a pathogen.
Yes. And then if you've ever had a bad fever, it's like being on fire. It's true. But the nut jobs that would get the Iranians to maybe, I would take this line of thinking as a potential. if they see that the West is creating such things, just like atomic bombs, and if they see that Israel is creating such a thing to wipe out all the Iranians, um, then just as there's a debate going on now in Tehran right now about this, should because even Khamenei, before they murdered him, the Zionists, he was openly, publicly saying, "Well, I am open to consider the possibility and discussion that we may need have atomic weapons as a deterrent." Never really wanting to do first strike. So he was opening up to that because Israel has nuclear weapons. And everybody need look no farther than Pyongyang to know that if you're deemed a rogue nation by certain very powerful nuclear powers, all you need to do is have 20 or 30 nuclear weapons, test a few off to prove that you have them. And who's bombed them since all this time, since the 90s when it was so close to them going up in smoke? So I think that the well-meaning mistake that could be made by the Shia is that they might create biological weapons as a deterrent to Israel doing the same. Because frankly, Israel, the Zionists may be thinking about that
Yeah,
because
yeah.
they have
And
great biolabs.
here's the crazy thing, John. 26 years ago, you had to be a Ph.D. to even do modification of this type of stuff.
Yeah.
An undergraduate in molecular biology can do this now.
Well,
It's
it's
retarded.
like the pyramid, it's like with nuclear fission to create enough fission. The first parts are really hard and take a long
Right,
time because it's the base of the pyramid. But when you get to the last step, it's almost like we're done.
right,
And now
right. And the
undergrads can do
reason
it.
building the bomb isn't hard.
No,
What's hard is procuring the material to do the centrifuging.
right.
That's the high barrier of entry for nuclear weapons. That you don't have that in biologics.
No, you're at the capstone right away, and you're an
Right,
undergraduate now.
right,
So because all that pyramidal stuff was all the science before that made
right.
it easier to understand and faster to get the final idea. And so yeah, I mean that's the big problem here.
And
And
John,
I could.
and Paul, it's even worse because the Iranians are very advanced in cyber warfare. So if we've already run simulations, I think, where it's only 10 days before, basically civilization breaks down the United States. So if you look again at the infrastructure, even for water infrastructure, we saw it happen with the railroads. We've already seen a couple of those incidents where they sort of, to me, seem like they've tested our infrastructure, and it's just a matter of the timing. So I think all of this, this scare about the nuclear weapons and tactical nukes, if I were the Iranians and I'm looking again, I'm scared of some type of American attack. I would create something much more be difficult to pinpoint who it is and create absolute confusion within the U.S. And I think if you look at the corruption with the government, because again, the founding fathers warned against this. We've seen a lot of politicians that have been bribed, and you had a couple of FBI directors saying that they know they're active terrorist cells operating within the U.S. It's not hard to imagine a scenario, which I'm sure they played out already, in which you have cyber attacks, infrastructure attacks, and you don't know what's going on, along with the release of a bioweapon. It's just, I think the nuclear is more of the kinetic, shiny object. It's what you're describing, Paul, is more along the lines of something that's cheaper and easier to deploy.
But also,
Yeah.
Don, I can hear in you the conditioning of something that kind of leads to this idea that the Iranians are always they're the mastermind terrorists. We've how many times?
No. Let me just explain my position. My position is I think the world to me looks more like criminal syndicates that use nation states as a medium to
Yes.
sort of confuse us. And so I think the Iranians, much like in the case of the United States right now, or even France or wherever, what nation state, you're not talking about a nation state anymore that represents the interests of the people. You're more looking at criminal syndicates that control rogue intelligence agencies. So it's a question of whether or not you have good acting people within the government that can restrain when false flag events from creating the conditions that lead us into these endless wars. And that's the question. Is there enough good people in positions of power that can restrain the sentiment of the people to that would move in a direction that would create, utter destruction?
Yeah, it's happening in America. It's happening already here. And if we can't find a real enemy, we'll make one up. I think every American should look in the mirror and see the real danger and then you've got a country here where we are
My
politically illiterate. How many of you listening to this show have read your constitutional rights? It's every citizen cannot, I would have it that no citizen can truly be a citizen of this country unless they were tested on the Constitution and its laws and their rights. You could not be an American citizen, whether you're born here or come from somewhere else. If we used to have people educated with civics. I grew up in a time in the 50s and 60s when it was so effective in protesting mistakes or wrong directions of our country that these powers that be, which eventually became this kind of syndicate, started to think, hey, why don't we just quietly pull out all the civics classes starting in the 1970s into the 80s, and let's just keep these Americans dumb about their part in making a democracy work. And they'll just get busy with all their consumerism and all of that, and we'll just over generations make the United States people a bunch of stupid fools. And the only way that can turn around is that Americans need to read their constitutional rights and practice them. Otherwise, if we start being dumb sheep, it's not surprising that the wolves start building syndicates to control us and slaughter us.
And John, one last thing on that. If I'm reading a book now about this experiment, United States of America. So it was the founding fathers said it might only be one generation, which would represent 25 years in which we could lose the experiment due to human nature. The thing that I'm reminded of, though, that is, the experiment created this unbelievable amount of technological innovation developed, by this entrepreneurial spirit led by this experiment and self-rule. The question that I have is, these other countries, if we all adopt the same type of entrepreneurial spirit, the question is what it is that's governing that entrepreneurial spirit, which goes back to this question of what is directing the technology that's being created. And that's, again, it seems to me, if you don't have a strong philosophical underpinning in which the founding fathers, there was a lot of conversations about what it meant to a moral people. What is a moral people? I'm not too sure. Like the founding fathers understood, it's a generation that these other countries. Why when you see a worse outcome?
Well, I think it's as simple as just in God we trust. It's already enshrined in our institutions, even on our money. It's the blessing of this experiment.
But it needed more secular balance because a person could say, I trust in God that we have to go and kill all the Iranians. A lot of people in Israel, trust in that God, and it's the God of their own projections. So it has to also have
I see your point, but the thing is it the God of the Union or the God of the Confederacy that prevails?
Indeed. You know, the one greatest book I tried, my brother's a real historian with the Civil War. I tried to turn him on to this. He's Christian. And I'd like any Christian out there, if you're open-minded to it, one of the last things that hasn't been written about the American Civil War, because, you know, people even tried to look like prophets, you know, the generals with their long beards and all. It was a very biblical time on both sides. But how did it happen that the concept of slavery, which is in the Old Testament, you know, I mean, and multiple wives and all of that. What's how was it that you had the abolitionists on one side and you had the other states' rights people in the South quoting the Bible, arguing their right to have slaves, and the people in the North arguing their right to take your slaves away from you? And I think it would be amazing if some biblical scholar of the Old and New Testament would try to write a history about that.
But
Because
John, but you'd
for
also
God, in the
see
name of God, both sides killed 600,000 soldiers and in total 1 million civilians.
but you can understand with Stalin and China with Mao, with the communism, of course, probably is the largest, the largest destruction of humanity. So I'm saying that there is no imperfect, essentially, say, social governance system, but it seems to me one at least allows the opportunity to reflect and possibly prosecute moral behavior.
Yeah, but when you're talking about moral behavior, watch your American blinders. We all have them in this country. Mine have been dropped, I contend. If you want to understand China and where China has gone since Mao and before Mao, you have to read Confucius. And then you'll understand Chinese society much better than, I mean, Mao even tried to follow it, but he didn't do it right. Mao also was cognitively declining when he was doing that Cultural Revolution. He was definitely.
Would you describe Confucius as a religious leader?
Well, it's a blend. If you study it, it's a blend. Religion is an important aspect of one's civilization. And you know, I remember my social studies teacher in high school, before they stopped having social studies, though I was the last year that they had those kind of classes. She lived in the Orient, and she said, you know, if Americans go on a beach, they all kind of split off and go on their own, up and down the beach, maybe with couples or something like that of people. But in China, she learned that everybody said, let's all walk down the beach together. You know, the concept of the mass, the group, is far more evolved in Asia than it is here. We have crystallized individualism. Now, the thing I've noticed about China is that it's always trying to find harmony. Um, in fact, what they're trying to do is something my master once said. He said probably the most perfect balanced political system would be one that is equally democratic and totalitarian when necessary, but only temporarily. But so
Did it happen with Lincoln?
Yes, of course it did. I mean, we can all the outrages of Lincoln's habeas corpus and all of that. Yeah, that I mean, he did some things that was beyond the law, and yes, he was doing the Chinese model. You know, there's times when democracy does not work. The best example of this is Cincinnatus, who where we get the word citizen from, was in early Rome Republic way back 400 BC. Rome was invaded by and had its army destroyed by Italian tribes, and so the Senate was trying to figure out how we could. We can't wait for the Senate to vote this out and all these chefs in the Senate to figure out what they got to do. We're going to have to make a tribune, a person that we vote for to temporarily be our dictator, because this issue to be solved has to have a totalitarian solution where everybody follows one guy and then we all whip it together, a new army, and defeat those people. If we keep debating about this, these guys are going to come like the Gauls into the Senate and burn down Rome. So they picked the man that they hoped would not be corrupted by power, and that was Senator Cincinnatus. And they gave him the fascists. The fascists are the twigs with the hatchets in it. That is where we get, that's the symbol of the Roman Senate. That's where we get the word fascism from. They said, okay, you have to be our fascist for 6 months, where whatever you say and do on pain of death, we must follow you. And so totalitarianism, when it's done temporarily by the right people, they had in 2 months a new army and they defeated the Italian army and they were saved. So he comes back with the fascist cradle in his arms to the Senate, and the Senate heads are looking at him and saying, well, according to our laws, you can remain a dictator for another 4 months. What is your decision? He handed back the fascists to the Senate and said, my interest now, the emergency's over. I just want to go back to my plow and tend my wine grapes. And, and he was called a second time during a mutiny of the army, and same thing happened. He passed the power back. We have to train ourselves into a kind. I'll be writing essays about the evolution of democracy down the next 4,000 years. And one of the things is the Chinese are doing it. They may not succeed, but they are trying to bring balance between free market capitalism, das Kapital, which is needed, as Marx knew. You have to be a rich country to be a communist country, and a communist party that doesn't allow the industrial guys to, like Trump, to become your president. I mean, they see us and they say, well, we learned from you how not to run governments. You let all the rich oligarchs get in there, and you've got what we had in China for millions of years. Like you've got warlords. The Chinese oligarch was a warlord, and it just for 1,000 years. So they know this problem, and so it's quite a daunting thing. You give wealth because communism to work, if it can, has to have capital, but you've got to make sure that the two are balanced. So that's they're doing that as well as the concept of democracy and totalitarianism in balance. It's very Confucian to try to balance things out like that.
We're near the end of the show here, John. So I just want to remind the audience, please click the link in the description. That will take you to John's website so you can sign up for a periodical and a reading. John, if you could just quickly explain what that entails.
Well, yes, if you go to the link, hogueprophecy.com, that's down there, you will, I'm doing something that's, I think by the 7th, I'm going to stop doing it, but it's something I may never do again for a long time. But I have this one-time opportunity that if you subscribe to the Hogue Prophecy Bulletin, or report that is, you will receive 24 months for the price of 12, $60. You will get 2 years. I've done this with a lot of the current subscribers, and a lot of them extended 2 years. And so I'm thinking of keeping this thing going until 7th of June. So it's a few days, it's a week away. And so this would be a great time to establish 2 years subscription for the price of one. So that's one thing that's happening. And then you get the Hogue Prophecy report. I'm probably going to have these single articles more often, but also I'll have 3 or 4 article bundles sometimes as well. And the other thing is I do readings from this very same office. You can have a one-on-one reading with me with some astrology in it if you like, and also tarot. It's a transmedium reading. And, all you need to do is write me talk with me at hogueprophecy.com or hoguebulletin.com. Anyway, and you just need to put on the title, the subject line, Hogue readings, HOGUE, apostrophe S readings. And I will see it in all the hundreds of things that are coming through, and I'll immediately get in touch with you as soon as I see it and give you the information about what the reading entails, how to pay for it on PayPal, and or do it through the mail. And then we can set up a time and have it. I usually, in America, I do it around 5 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. Seems to work for all the other time zones pretty well. But I also do foreign as well. So yes, so I'd love to see you face to face in glorious two dimensions and opposite parts of the world.
So just a reminder, everyone, please click the link to go to John's website, take a look at what he is offering, and please help, because we do these videos for free. I enjoyed this conversation with the audience. Thank you for the ones that were participating in the chat. And
Yes.
Don, thank you for the conversation on X Bases. Greatly appreciate it. But I turn into a pumpkin when it's too late. So hopefully everyone does have a good night. But I will replay this on all the channels. So please make sure you subscribe and take a look at the different channels. And ask your social media to follow so we can grow this show, so we can reach a larger audience. We'd greatly appreciate it. So with that, John,
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Don. It was wonderful. It was a wonderful discussion. I love more of you to pitch in. It's so much fun to have interactions with all of you.
All right. Okay, so we're going to shut down the show, but thank you for watching, everybody, and have a great night.